Hi everyone, and welcome to this week's video. Today, we're going to go over the different Connectives truth tables and some practice questions. So let's get started. So the first truth table you guys are given is the negation truth table. So this is pretty much involving one atomic letter, okay, one atomic sentence, and then two truth values, a true or a false. And so whenever you see a true, the opposite of that is going to be a false. If you see a false, opposite of that is the true. And that's just basically applying the negation rule. The next truth table is involving two atomic sentences. Okay, and so that's just simply because the conjunction involves two atomic sentences in order to make one, in order to be applied. In order for us to have this connective, you need two atomic sentences around it. Okay, and so pretty much you just memorize this pattern. It's going to be true, true, false, false. And then for the second letter, it's going to be true, false, true, false. Okay, and so whenever you see two truths, you're just going to put a true in between them. That makes sense, right? If you see in this and that, and they're both true, it's both the case, then it's true. Other times, when one of them is true, so A is true but B is false, then the conjunction is going to be false. And same thing, other way around, if the A is false and the B is true, then the conjunction is also going to be false. And then if both are false, then the conjunction is also going to be false. So the way I like to memorize it is basically the first one is true and the last three are false. Okay, and that's just because you have a conjunction, which is and, so you have to have both of the two atomic sentences in there. So if I have an example where I say I'm gonna bring an umbrella and a jacket, then I have to do, both have to be the case in order for it to be true. If I don't bring one of them, then it's false. If I bring neither of them, then it's also false. This is different for the disjunction, because in that case, it's the same. So this is the same for the first thing, right? So if it's both true, then the disjunction is true. However, if one of them is false, it's still true, right? And same thing, if A is false and B is true, then the disjunction is going to be true. If A is false and B is false, the disjunction is going to be false. So why is it that when, how come this is not like the conjunction pretty much? So the idea is that it's either or, right? So if I tell you you get either the salad or the rice, for example, and you choose salad, so I get salad but not rice, for example, that's still true. The either or, the idea, the logic behind the either or, still valid. It's still true. However, when I tell you you get either salad or rice, but then it ends up being the case that you can't get either of them, but not the salad, but not the rice, well, then it's going to be false. Then you just took away the validity of the disjunction and it becomes false. Okay? And so if it's not making sense, don't worry. Just memorize it as all the first three are true and the last one is false. This is the opposite of the conjunction because the first one is true and the last three are false. For the conditional, and I think this one is the most complicated for me, but don't worry. When you memorize it, it's still the same as memorizing it for the other connectives, but the logic behind it is the most confusing, but that's okay. There's a simple way of really making sense of it, and let's go through and see what we can do. So when we have two truths, that's obviously going to be true. That's been consistent all across the conjunction and the disjunction. However, when I have a true and a false, then that's going to be false. And you're like, okay, sounds good. But if I have A being false and B being true, then that's true. And you're like, wait a minute. So let's take a closer look. So let me finish this off. So if A is false and B is false, then that's also true. Okay, that's really confusing. You're like, okay, what's going on? So the idea behind this is pretty much that if the the if statement, right? Because remember, conditional is the if then statement. So if the if statement, the first part, is true, and then our conclusion, the B part, is false, then automatically the conditional is not doing its job. The conditional's job is to say, if this is the case, then this is going to happen. But if the thing that it's supposed to happen at the end didn't happen, then the conditional's job is not being done. However, with this, it's a little bit different. It's kind of tricky because the thing, so we have the if and the then statement. The if statement didn't even happen in the first place, but the then happened. Well, the idea here is that the conjunction isn't even being like, it's not really playing a role in this. It's still valid in that case because it's not being disproven. The idea is if this, then that. So if the first part didn't happen, the if part didn't happen, that doesn't affect the consequence. The consequence can happen on its own, and that will not take away from the validity of the conditional. So a practical example of this, or a conditional, is saying, okay, if it's raining, then I'm going to bring my umbrella. Well, if it happens to be the case that it's raining and I don't bring my umbrella, so B is false, then that takes away the conditional. The conditional's job is to say, if it's raining, then this will happen. Well, I didn't do the then. I didn't bring my umbrella. So then that's going to be false for the conditional. But if it turns out to not be raining and I do end up bringing my umbrella, that is a true statement because I could bring my umbrella for any other reason, and that's not affecting the truth of the original statement. If it's raining, then I'm going to bring my umbrella. Similarly, with the true falses, if it happens to be the case that that it's not raining, so I don't bring my umbrella, that does not take away from the truth of the conditional, so it still ends up being true because it's not testing or it's not challenging the idea that if it's raining, then I'm gonna bring my umbrella. I hope this makes sense, but if not, don't worry. All you're expected to know is just to memorize all of this, but I'm trying to help you guys understand like where this came from. For the biconditional, same thing. If they're both true, then it's going to be true. Pretty straightforward. And similarly to the conditional, if A is true but B is false, it's also going to be false. However, this time, if A is false and B is true, then the biconditional is going to be false in that case. And if they're both false, similarly to the conditional, it's also going to be true. So the logic behind that one is just because it's a double arrow, right? It's going in both directions. So both either have to be true or both have to be false in order for the biconditional to work, in order for it to be true. But when either of them is different, then it's going to be false. The biconditional isn't doing its job. Okay, so let's take a look at some practice problems to do the truth tables for them. So if I have A conjunction B, conditional B, so this is similarly to when you're given math a question like when you open parentheses and you have 3 times 10, all of that divided by 5. So you can't take those out of order. You have to do it within the order, and parentheses are the things that are going to help you with that. So this is exactly the same with this, only this time instead of actually solving it, you're going to put truth values underneath it. So let's take a look at our chart. So this is how you're expected to set up the chart. You have 2 variables in this case, even though there's 3 in the question, but there's only 2. So there's A and a B, and the B is just repeated twice. Okay, so like we know from previously from our truth table that if we have 2 variables, then we're going to have to set it up like this: true, 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 false, false, true, false, true, false. Okay, and the idea here is you're going to have to basically copy and paste that onto its corresponding letter. So this is kind of like my key at the beginning, right? These are all the letters that I'm using, and every time I see an A, I'm going to put the same thing, right? So under A, I'm going to put whatever's under column A, and then under column B, I'm going to put that under all the B's that are there. Pretty straightforward. But now we have to figure out what is the next order of operations. What is the next step that we have to take in order to get the answer? So just like the math problem, whatever's inside the parentheses, we start with that first. So it's going to be what, right? It's going to be the conjunction, right? So these are the 2 columns that we're going to use to figure out the conjunction. And we're going to use our cheat sheet. We're going to use our truth tables to look at that. So we're going to pull up the conjunction truth table, and we're going to see if both cases are true, then it's going to also be true. If one of them is false, then it's going to be false. If the other one is false, it's also going to be false. And if both are false, it's also going to be false. And we see that over here. Okay, and try to memorize them. First few times, look at your table, but other times try to practice and then check your work later. Okay, so now what is the next order of operations? It's going to be the last connective, and that is, in this case, the conditional, and that's pretty much giving us the answer to the problem kind of thing, right? It's the last step you do before you are done. So which two columns are we going to be using to figure out what goes within the conditional? Is it the A column? Is it the conditional? I'm sorry, is it the, I always forget what this is called. The conjunction, and then, or is it the B, or is it this B? Which one? It's two columns, so you have to pick out of these. So it's actually going to be in the green over here, and these are the two columns that you're going to be using. So it's whatever's inside the conjunction, right? Whatever answer you came up with here, and then the B is the next building block. So think of it as like, this is the answer for this building block, this is the answer for this building block. Now we're combining it in the last order of operation, which is the conditional, and we're gonna get whatever answer that is. Okay, so if I have a true and a true within a conditional, it's gonna be true. If I have a false and a false, that's also gonna be true. If I have a false and a true, that's also gonna be true. And if I have a false and a false, it's also gonna be true. So there you have it. There's your answer. You just highlight it or indicate somehow in your homework that this is your answer. So just to make sure you get points. And in this case, it's a tautology because it's true in every case. Okay, so let's look on to the next example. This one is a little bit more complicated, but don't worry. It's just the exact same thing as the other one. And similarly here to the math question over here. So you always have to start with whatever's inside the innermost parenthesis. So whatever answer I get here and whatever answer I get here, then I finally multiply it and I get my answer, right? So applying that logic to this question, let's set up our truth table. So pretty straightforward. Again, we have the two variables on the outside and we separate all these off. I recommend doing this on a chart so you can really make sure you stay not messy and you like have each variable each column separated. So that way you pretty much get the question right because it's really easy to mess up on these. Okay, so same thing under every A, under every B, we put everything in. Okay, so which is the first connective? Which one is the first connective that we have to apply? So the idea is you're going to have to start with the negation in this case, right? And the reason for that is like the negation, whenever it's next to a letter, it's going to have to be combined with that letter, okay? So almost like takes on that identity. So I always start with the negation unless it's on the very outside. If that's the case, don't worry about it. But if it's next to a letter, just right away negate it, get it out of the way, okay? So in our case, this column A, this column B and A, these two columns are going to be negated, okay? So the opposite of true is false, the opposite of true is false, true, true, and then here false, true, false, true. And you see that right there, okay? So then the next connective or the next order of operations is going to be the biconditional, okay? And so the reason for that is because it's within that parenthesis, you're done with the negation, you have the two identities of the negation, and now you have to combine it with the biconditional, that last connective that's within that parenthesis. And so also for this one as well, it's that connective within that parenthesis is that conditional, right? And so that also you're gonna have to combine to get your answer. So this column and this column is gonna combine to get this column to get the conditional, and this, so this is where you have to be careful. For here, you can't just use B and A and get your conditional and you're done and you're good to go. You have to use the negation because that's the new identity for these letters. They are the negation of them. It's the biconditional of not B and not A. It's not just A and B, right? It's not B if and only if not A. So you have to include the not in there. And that's why we use these two columns. So in this case, it's like F and F. So true, false, two falses and by conditional make a true and a false, and so on and so forth, right? And this is where you get your answer. And then the next connective that we're going to be using is obviously the last one that's left, is the biconditional. And what do you think, which two columns are we going to be using to figure that out? So similarly with math, right? You figured out the answer for this parenthesis, you figured out the answer for this parenthesis. Now it's time to, combine these two answers and get your final answer. Okay, so over here, we're going to use these two columns, the answers for each parenthesis pretty much. And then we're going to pull out our cheat sheet and figure it out. And try to do it without the cheat sheet as well. And this is your answer. So in this case, it's a contingency because there's one false in there. And there you go, you're good to go. So just keep in mind some key points is that memorize the truth values for all the truth tables. Those 5 connectives have their own truth table and memorize each of them. And also start with the smallest scope within the sentence and move out, right? So in our case, it was the 2 parentheses that were inside that were the smallest. And then we moved out and combined them together with that last connective. And actually within that one parenthesis over here, it wasn't just the connective, this connective was the only smaller one, it was the negation. So we had to start with even further, we had to start with the negation, first negating it, and then solving it within that parenthesis, and then finally combining it with the biconditional. And so keep in mind, and this is having to do with the last homework, when you guys are wondering like, why are we asked about main connective or scope? This is just to help you do the truth tables. So keep in mind that the main connective is your answer. This is the final thing that you circle or you highlight or you indicate somehow that this is your final answer. I hope this was helpful for you guys. Good luck on your next homework, and I'll see you guys all next week.